Hello, world. I'm Dan McCarthy,
And I'm Brian Basaga.
and we want to welcome you to the Functional Fighters podcast.
This is our discussion forum about the martial arts as it relates to self-defense, practical applications, and we cover a lot more than that: history, applicability in the modern world, and all kinds of stuff. Our goal, as always, is to make everyone a better martial artist.
So, tonight's topic is probably going to be one that ruffles some feathers. And the conversation topic is: have the martial arts modern day gone soft? Martial arts have existed for as long as humanity has. The first time, a caveman beat up another caveman, you had martial arts. It's as old as humanity is. But, um, with every generation, are we getting tougher or are we getting softer? And I think that's really kind of the conversation for tonight.
Yeah, so I'm going to do something I've done on this podcast before, and make you define something for me, which is what does it mean to be soft?
Well, okay, so actually, it's worth defining in this particular context because when you start talking about martial arts, there's actually hard style martial arts and there's soft style martial arts. So it,
Yeah,
it,
but
it
that's not what
does
we're talking about.
that isn't the conversation tonight. The real conversation tonight is are we watering down martial arts to the point that they are no longer effective in the real world? Is it just to use a phrase that I was given a long time ago as a student in kung fu, is martial arts just becoming flowery kicks and embroidery punches, right? And it's all form with no substance.
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly, some what I would call glaring examples of that, and one, that just jumps right into my head is some of the stuff you tune into the right cable channel at the right time of night, and you find XMA going on out there, right?
ESPN
And
stuff.
yeah, and that stuff looks great. I mean, it's beautiful to watch, right? And the level of skill and coordination that's on display is impeccable, right? I mean,
Yeah,
I'm not detracting from it in those respects at all, but it is not even remotely similar to anything that is practical or useful in a
right,
self-defense scenario, right?
right, right. Oh, and in all fairness, they wouldn't claim it is either. I
Right.
just for the record, they're not, you know they're not saying, hey, this is exactly how we would do this in a street fight. It's intended as performance art, and they know that and they acknowledge that. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think this hard and soft, well, I guess if the opposite of in the way we've defined it, the opposite of soft is hard, right?
Let's
Maybe a
say hardcore.
better word would be effective, right? Is martial arts
Yeah,
still effective, or has it gone soft?
yeah,
Um, I think you have to judge that by its use case, right?
yeah.
So I think the answer can be different depending on the way that you're looking at the thing. If we stick with the XMA example for a minute here, um, any training that someone who wants to be an XMA competitor is getting, right? If it does not effectively prepare them for the competitions or the exhibitions that they're going to, that's bad, right? I mean, that's bad
Huh.
training. That is
Right.
training that has failed to achieve its purpose. You can say the same thing about self-defense training, right? You can go to martial arts schools that claim to be self-defense schools, and they teach you stuff that's garbage,
Yeah.
and it's not preparing you, right? Is that the same thing as soft, or is it just bad training?
Oof. Wow, that's a good question. I mean, from my perspective coming into tonight, it was basically uh my thought process was, and I've been doing this a long time, and you know how it is. Anytime you've done something for a long time, you see the whippersnappers coming up underneath you, and you get the, well, in my day, uphill both ways in the
Yes,
snow
exactly.
barefoot. uh, so there's definitely, if you were to talk to Bill Wallace, Bill Superfoot Wallace, who I'm talking about, if you were to talk to Chuck Norris, if you were to talk to Joe Lewis, rest his soul, if you were to discuss this with any of them, and they were to tell you what they did back in the day, they're going to tell you about what has been called very often the blood and guts era of martial arts. And, when they were tournament competing, when they were fighting on the circuit, not self-defense, ring fighting,
Mm-hmm.
um, blood, you know, real injury, things getting broken or dislocated or bleeding or knocked out and things like that, compared to tag. Oh, I tagged
Right.
you,
Right.
right? And I think kind of that was the context I was approaching the conversation with today. Was, are we diluting martial arts to a point where it no longer really represents what it should, what it's supposed to. I mean,
Yeah, yeah, I see where you're coming from on that. It certainly we could set aside the issue of just bad training, bad techniques, right? Like you're learning maybe through effective teaching techniques, you're learning stuff that just isn't going to work, right? We can leave that aside for now.
Yeah.
Then the next question that comes to my head is again, things are definitely different than they were 10, 20, 30, 50, however, just go back to any era and it's different, right?
Yeah.
And there's some reasons, I think, for that. Some of them are ideological and some of them are, science based too, right? I mean, if you want to, if I can draw a parallel to what I'm thinking here in another sport, weightlifting or physical fitness in general, right? Go back, to the 1970s or 1980s, and the guys who are reaching the pinnacle of strength and or even physique, like Mr. Universe type guys, steroids aside and all that stuff too, but the way they trained then compared to the way they train now is a lot different.
Oh,
right?
absolutely.
And that's because we've learned a lot about how to train, right? And the same thing
And how
is
not to.
exactly, yes, how not to. Very good point. The training in martial arts is the same, right? I mean, we're always learning, we're always adapting, we're always changing how we teach in hopes to be more effective, right? So we don't want to write something off as bad just because it's different. We need to analyze that a little bit.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Yeah, that's actually, that's one of the what I consider one of the great martial arts sins is, oh, your style is different from my style. That ergo means you're wrong, and what you do is bad because what I do is good. It's the Master Ken, uh, right?
I love that. Yeah.
Only I love Master Ken as well. He's a fantastic caricature of modern day martial arts, and if you spend any time watching Enter the Dojo and you train in traditional martial arts or you teach traditional martial arts or whatever, at some point in time you're going to snicker to yourself watching Master Ken because you've been in a class where an instructor has done that or said that, or you're going to hang your head in shame, put your head in your hands and go, oh God, I've done that. uh
Is that what that looks like when I do that? Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I'm guilty, absolutely
Oh
guilty.
yeah.
I remember when Master Ken kind of became a phenomenon, and actually watching him at the Martial Arts Super Show entertain a whole bunch of an entire audience of martial arts instructors, and giggling my head off because I heard so many things I had heard over the years from different teachers, and then he said something, and I had to go, "Oh, that was me."
Yep.
That was me, you know. Um, but legit. When you look at this stuff, uh, different is not necessarily bad. It really isn't.
Yeah, I think one of my, first martial arts teachers, they had the very, um, you know, dogmatic, like this is the technique, this is the way the technique has been for hundreds of years.
Mhm,
You know,
mhm,
you can question why you can't make it work, and I will teach you how to make it work, but you can't question whether the technique works or not.
right.
Because you know at least they had a better reason than because I told you so, right? I mean, their view was, these techniques were developed in feudal Japan, and literally like, they were literally battle tested back then,
Mhm,
right? I mean,
mhm,
like these techniques survived to, the 2000s in America because the people who did them on the battlefield in Japan 300 years ago survived, right? So
mhm,
that's their credibility, right?
right.
Um, you know, which which is fine. I mean, from a technical standpoint, I guess another aspect of that is like, in what way are we teaching, or how hard are we training that technique?
Right.
And like you've mentioned before, some schools 20 years ago, you'd go in there and you'd leave looking like you'd been in a fight, and every belt rank you got a little more experience and you got more hits on your opponent than they get hit on you, and you develop that way.
Yeah.
Not a lot of schools still teach that way.
No. Well, and realistically, even from my perspective, as starting off as a student, I would go to class and I would train in class, and I was the youngest person in my class, at 11. And there'd be a third degree black belt instructor who, I don't know how old he was, but my guess at that point in time would have been late 20s, early 30s, based on my memory.
Mhm.
And I would literally get slapped around. Um, Literally, in the most literal sense, get slapped around. He would deflect anything I did while sparring, and we didn't wear gear either, by the way. Um, that was sparring gear was a very rare thing at that point in time. Um, in the early 1990s. You can't go to a martial arts school nowadays without having it. I mean, you better not anyway. Um, if you go to a martial arts school and they are not using protective gear, that is a very dubious proposition nowadays, because chances are that place is not properly insured. Just for the record,
Yeah,
if you are listening to this and you are training at a school and gear is not used while sparring, be careful, because that school probably doesn't actually have insurance. If you get injured, um, you might be at your own risk there, because every insurance company I know that insures martial arts schools requires you to pad up if you're going to square off with each other.
right.
Um,
And I think just beyond the liability aspect of it, like we've learned, right? We've learned that, how injuries occur in training and how that type of equipment allows us to train better by allowing us to train harder and more frequently, right? So it's worst case scenario, it's irresponsible, but still, even in the best case scenario, it's not optimal, right? Personally, I have the same feeling about mat shoes. By the way, I feel like the data is in terms of you know foot injuries and hygiene and injuries to your partner, and foot gear should be a thing that we do in all martial arts schools right now.
sure. Um, See, and the argument has been made to me by one of my own teachers, who grew up in that blood and guts era, that technique worsened directly in correlation to the um, introduction of sparring gear. That student technique physically became worse when sparring gear became a thing. Um, because from a direct standpoint, people changed the way that they did the techniques because of the gear. So in a literal sense, I'm going to do this technique differently now because I have this piece of foam on my foot, or so on and so forth. And then also the indirect cause of, now I don't have the same feedback from a technique. When I'm struck by it, it doesn't feel the same. Or when I strike someone with it, it doesn't feel the same. So he has very often represented to me that sparring gear might be like, one of the number one evils of modern martial arts, because people have less skill and less control in a direct correlation to that. I don't know that I can, refute that argument or support it, but I've certainly heard it, and heard a pretty good long explanation of why he feels that way.
Yeah, so I think that's going to come back to, again, what is the end purpose of that sparring drill? And we just did a show on sparring, and you know how I feel about sparring. So if you're going to be sparring in a competition ring or something like that, it doesn't matter that the technique is different, right? I mean, like, gear has changed every discipline of everything over time, right? I mean, like,
Absolutely.
a photographer doesn't take a picture the same way today that they did 20 years ago when there was still actually film in the camera, right? And you don't drive a car the same way now that you did, whatever, 20, 30 years ago when everything had a manual transmission.
Well, heck, they've even changed steering because of airbags. Hand position is
Yeah,
different.
right. Not 10 and 2 anymore. It's whatever it is, 9 and 3 or
9 and
whatever
3
they
now.
tell you now, right? And so again, that's different, but is it really bad? Now, I would say you could start to make an argument for that's bad if you're sparring and you're putting all this gear and pads on, and you're going to be a bare knuckle fighter the next weekend. That's probably is a problem, right? Because you're going to go in there and you're going to find out all the differences in the ring at the worst possible time.
Right.
So, to me, that's what it comes back to, is what's our use case? And we have to define whether we're soft or effective based on that use case, right? We're primarily at least I will say I am primarily a self-defense martial artist. And I know that I need to know what it feels like to really do someone, but I can't be breaking my partner's wrists and elbows and stuff like that on a regular basis in class, right? So there's always going to be a limit. And I think, we're going to have to get into another aspect of this thing too, which is how hardcore do you train, and on what time frame are you trying to achieve a certain level of success or a certain level of skill, right? Or application.
That's really good, because I was kind of circling around in my brain. That's like two different things right there that you just said. And one of them was rattling around in my head right before you said it. One of the other aspects of things is, legitimately, what is the intensity level of training? Because, martial arts 30, 40 years ago in the United States was very much driven by being brought in by, the American Armed Forces from other places. So karate and taekwondo and judo and all that stuff was really imported into the U.S. thanks to armed forces. They are predominantly the reason that we adopted those things and brought over teachers, or however you want to look at it. So it's hard to pull the military aspect out of martial arts training. I mean, it's why we say yes sir, yes ma'am, all that. That's not Okinawan karate. That's, United States Marine Corps is what that is.
Yeah, right.
Let's be honest about that. And so I would say that the intensity of training has changed a lot over the years, and I definitely would say that in the old days, martial arts didn't make the weak strong. I made the strong stronger. If you had a strong
Right.
spirit, if you had a strong spirit, a strong heart, but a weak body, then you would become hardy in the martial arts. The exterior uh, would be galvanized because of the interior. Um, I think I'm an example of that. I think I was a pretty weak kid in many aspects. I would tell you I was weak in terms of physicality. I was pretty soft-hearted too, but I had a strong mind, a really strong mind, and so my mental discipline kicked in ways that my body, uh, just learned to conform to, and even I got harder in terms of my spirit. Just suck it up is not something I really knew how to do when I was 11 years old, that I very commonly tell myself
Mhm.
now, SIU. So that's because of my martial arts training. It really is. And in my brain, I was able to imagine like the end goal. Who was I gonna be? Is what it comes down to. In my mind, I had this mental picture of the result I was looking for, and because I wanted that result, uh, even though I wasn't strong, I wasn't fast, I wasn't flexible, and I was kind of a pansy, honestly, when it came to my overall. Well, I don't want to work hard. I don't want to work hard. Uh, but at the end of the day, I still knew that the result I wanted was going to require that hard work. So I would kind of reach a point and be done, and then come back later and push
Yeah.
again. You know?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you go like back to your military example, you know, military training doctrine is kind of set up with the idea that, all right, you just enlisted, you showed up to boot camp today, and 12 weeks from now, you could be on the front lines of a battle,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
So, how much time do we have to make you competent, and how hard do we have to push to get it done in that period of time, right?
Clearly less than 12 weeks.
Yes, and the answer to that is we got to push. We don't have much time, and we got to push pretty damn hard, right?
Yep.
And we are lucky, I think, and so that came through to all those people who brought martial arts back, like you were talking about, right? Because that's how they were trained. So that's how they train those people. And in the military, I guess some of the people, depending on what era exactly you're talking about. Some people in the military want to be there, but that wasn't always the case, right? Some people were conscripted, at various points in time. So, in terms of martial arts in reality today, we are in a different environment than that. We generally in the U.S. live in peacetime, and there's some bad towns and bad parts of towns, and I mean, there's some stuff that happens, but reality is, thankfully, most of us will never be in a physical altercation in our lifetime, right? So people walking into martial arts schools, they don't all have the need, first off, right, to be trained hard because they have a limited time frame to achieve some level of competence, right? But also they don't have the interest in being trained that way, right?
Yeah, that's the big thing.
Yeah, I mean, from a commercial school standpoint, right? You could be that kind of school. You can be the Cobra Kai dojo that still beats up on everybody, right? And as long as you advertise enough and have a big enough pool of people to bring through the door, right, you could survive, right? You can be that kind of school. And, frankly, like the world needs those kind of schools to serve that kind of clientele, right? Because not every school wants to do that. From an altruistic standpoint, as a martial arts, master after all these years, I kind of feel like it's valuable to bring the martial arts to as many people as we can. And therefore, we tailor the training to make it be more palatable to more different types of people, right? And the trade-off that we make there is it is less intense in some ways, right? Not going to leave class with a bloody nose very often, the way I teach class, right?
Right.
You're also not going to be as hardcore after 6 months of training as you would be if you were in a school that bloodied your nose every time you came to class, right? Because you would, if you didn't quit, you would adapt quickly, right?
Right.
But a lot of people are going to quit.
Yeah.
Right. So I would rather have, I choose to make that trade-off in my training to get to train so that the techniques are still effective. The education that we're getting is still effective. The stuff they're going to do in the street will work, but it's going to take more time to develop that level of confidence because the intensity is down.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that is 100% true. I mean, even in our own organization, I can think of other instructors in our caliber, roughly same experience and all that kind of stuff, who are maybe less hardcore than either of us, and I think they have ones who are more hardcore than either one of us. There's kind of a variety there. It's kind of a sliding scale of things, um, and at the end of the day, I think that the main difference comes down to people. There are many different kinds of people. That's why there is so much variety in anything. Okay, if you didn't have so much variation in people, why are there so many different phone companies? Just as an example,
Yeah,
right?
sure.
Right. Just as an example, you got Android, you got iPhone, and things even beyond that. Well, why do we need that? Why don't we just have one? Oh, because people aren't all the same. That's why. I
That's
mean,
right.
it's
Yeah.
it's as simple as that. People are all very different from each other. Well, why are all these different martial arts schools? Very simple. People are very different in terms of their attitudes. We're a lot more diverse. Human beings are a lot more diverse psychologically than they are physiologically. We're all kind of the same thing from a physiological standpoint, unless you've been injured, um, or you are on the very far extremes in terms of your anatomy and physiology. When I say that, I'm talking about a sumo wrestler is an extreme. That is an absolute extreme. Just to give an example, you're not going to teach a sumo wrestler. You're not going to teach a sumo wrestler Tai Chi. I mean, you could. You could. I mean, there's no reason why he can't learn it. Um, but is that playing towards his strengths? Is that playing towards his physicality and towards what's going to come natural to him? Hell no, of course not. Right? You're going to teach a sumo wrestler sumo wrestling. It be the way he's built.
Yeah,
Right.
right. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of true in any other physical discipline as well, right? I mean, certain people are genetically predisposed to be football players and not basketball players, and vice versa, right?
Well, even in football, somebody's going to be a quarterback and somebody's going to be a lineman, and
Right, exactly.
there's very often natural physical attributes that they already go in that direction. Not that a lineman can't learn the quarterback skills and vice versa, but your average lineman is quite a bit bigger than your average quarterback. But your average quarterback is also a lot faster than your average lineman.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
So there's some predispositions there, and there are a lot of differences in people. But truthfully, in the martial arts, the biggest difference I see comes down to psychology. Um, you have that person who wants to learn this stuff, but they don't want to hurt anybody. So they're going to look for something very specific in terms of the psychology and the philosophy of the art. You have that person who wants to get in the ring and be a weekend warrior in the ring. They're going to go for something
Mhm.
also very different. And so that, in my opinion, comes down a lot to the psychology of the person.
Yeah, absolutely true. I think, there's a lot of guys who, the martial arts isn't tough enough for them,
Mm,
right? And those are, you know, people like that who are self-defense oriented. They typically turn to firearms, right?
mm,
They're the guys doing all that kind of training, and that can be a good tool for self-defense, but certainly limits your ability to apply varying levels of force, right? I
right.
mean, but again, mentally, you will never convince them that they need to step foot into a martial arts studio,
Yeah.
just because they're just mentally they're just not there, right?
Yeah. Well, you look at me as a person. I'm actually a pretty hardcore person. Um, in many ways. I'm a pretty intense guy in a lot of respects, but I'm actually really gentle when it comes to. So I don't want to hurt anybody. I like hardcore for me. I enjoy hardcore. I like pushing myself and testing myself, and I get an adrenaline rush from those things, but not from harming another human being.
Sure, right.
I want ways to not hurt somebody and be able to control them and things like that. But then, on the weekend, I'm gonna run a 12-mile obstacle course because I like that pressure. So, you
Yeah,
know,
sure.
that's kind of the weirdness
Yeah.
with me.
No, that's another good example. There are a lot of people who take physical fitness and the pursuit of of that type of thing very seriously, but will never run a tough mudder,
Yeah,
right? Because it's just that's not their thing, right?
too
Martial arts is the
intense.
same way. Yeah, maybe too intense, maybe whatever. There could be 100 good reasons why they don't want to do it, right? But they could be.
Nah, there's
They,
no good reason.
there you go. Well, uh, uh, we'll save that for another episode, I guess.
Fair
But
enough.
yeah, I think they could be that person could be in as good a shape as you,
Totally.
right?
Or
But
better.
or even better, right? But they're
Yeah.
just not going to do it. Martial arts has instruction has to cover that entire spectrum too.
Yeah.
I think the key thing is as instructors where we're going to go soft is if we lower the standards of execution. And if we omit the key aspects of the training somehow, right? And that could be the physical techniques we stop teaching, even though people really need to know them, or just even the mental aspect of martial arts and preparing people for what does a self-defense scenario really look like? What is it really, what is the timing going to feel like? What is the adrenaline going to feel like? I mean, there's all those things that you have to have as part of your training for it to be effective training. When you start taking that out, right, that's when you're going to go soft. That's when you're
Okay.
going to become ineffective, right?
So you said something a second ago, and I want to bring it back because I feel like you have something more to say there, and I want to hear it. Which is you pardon my paraphrase because I don't remember the exact wording you use, so you can correct me as in terms of your intentions here if I misunderstood. But um, you basically said um, taking something that is essential, an essential part of the training, and omitting it. Do you have an example of, like, in your own training where maybe that's happened? Like, so, you know of a case where you trained in a school where something was completely missing that should have been there, or you've seen another instructor do that, or can you think of something that you yourself would know you'd be doing a disservice to your students if you decided to take it out of the curriculum?
Yeah, I mean, well, I guess there's a couple of different things I can think of. I won't say that I've seen all of these directly as like a real world example, but one of the things we talked about in a previous episode was the need for some kind of force on force training, right? So I hate sparring. I'm not afraid to say it again, and it's on YouTube for posterity now. So you can replay me saying it over and over again for the rest of the time. But I do support that realistic self defense type training, and I think if you never have that in a self defense martial arts system, that is a disservice to your students, right? Mm-hmm. And I think because the first time they're going to feel anything like that is when they need to get it right, and so if that is not there, right, then I mean, they might get lucky and get it right, but they might not, and that might be their last chance, right? So you got to have that. I think if you take that out, it's soft. I think there are other aspects of martial arts systems that we kind of set aside the "are you teaching me effective stuff," right? But another example I can come up with here is like you have to have some sort of ground survival training. Right. Now, some martial arts take it to both extremes. There are some martial arts where it's all ground fighting and that's all you got, right? They might give you some techniques to get the guy on the ground, but aside from that, there's not a lot of stand-up manipulation, right? And then there's others that have none. I think again, that's not a complete system. And so if you decide like, oh, my students don't like that, and I'll tell you, when I have a class and I say, tonight we're working on ground survival, there are usually not many folks in class who are excited about that, right? Occasionally there's guys who love it. And actually, we share some studio space with a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu club. So they're all about it. But people who come to my program, not so much. But I still do it, right? I mean, I still make my students learn that stuff because they have to have some level of competency there. Mm-hmm. There's other stuff that it's just like that. I know like another example where like we're a defensive martial art for the most part. I still teach my students how to go on offense when they need to. Right. Yeah. Because again, I don't want them picking fights, but there are times when you're like reading the situation and it's like, I need to move first here. Otherwise something bad's going to happen. Right. Yeah. And so again, I have to teach that.
There was a great, just to interject, there's a great moment I can speak to that last night in my school. Our friend, our mutual friend, Master Scott Taylor, was with one of our students, and the context of the situation was it was a self-defense situation against a person with a weapon, and Master Scott was making the point to the student who was armed and attacking him, I don't got to wait for you to attack me. That's not a requirement legally. If you brandish a weapon at me and threaten me, I can attack you, and that's a true statement. So yeah, I like what you're saying there. That we can't always be. What it comes down to, that I agree with, is extremes are bad. Extreme, right. Whether you lean really far to the defensive or really far to the offensive, or you're hardcore into ground or none at all. Extremes are bad. You need to cover your bases. So you've got to give everybody the benefit of doing all of it.
Yeah, and I think it's easy to kind of fall down the slippery slope there as an instructor because of what you were talking about before with just the difference in psychology, right? We have a technique in our system, we call it forward wrist lock, right? It's the one where you kind of externally rotate the hand as far as you can and then kind of push it in, right?
Yep.
I hate that technique.
Me too.
Right? It is just not one that is natural for me. I can do it after 20 years of trying. I can do it right the first try most of the time, but it's just not a go-to for me. And
hate it.
It would be easy for me to not teach that, right? I mean, aside from I could get in trouble by, the people who certify me as an instructor and all that, but just put it aside. It'd be easier for me as an instructor to say, oh yeah, you got to do this technique, but it really sucks. So I'm not going to test you on that one real hard. Right. It's easy to slide off of that. Same thing, just like, again, I could train a student who knows all the techniques, but is really just a very, I'll use the term soft-hearted. That's probably not accurate, but, just really a very defensive-minded or passive type of person, and they could start teaching classes and completely, even subconsciously, right, completely omit the really hard to do stuff, the offensive techniques or the really more devastating stuff, just because it's not something they want to think about or not something they want to do. So it can happen, right? It can happen kind of when you're not looking or when you're not thinking about it.
What happens when we get that student? We're still kind of talking psychology here, but we're trying to serve everybody we can. Mm-hmm. So what happens when we get that student in who is they themselves a contradiction, because they come to us for self-defense? I want to learn self-defense. I want to learn to do this stuff. Yet they've got baggage, for lack of a better term. They have, the reason why they've come to us is because they've already experienced trauma. There's been a trauma of some case, and now they're coming to us after the fact. But the real problem is there's now some level of trauma in their history. I am really hesitant to use the term PTSD, because I think that term gets thrown around a lot nowadays. I think it's extremely disrespectful to those who actually have PTSD. It actually really aggravates me when people say, oh, I have PTSD, because they don't know anything about the actual psychological condition.
Right.
And I think that's extremely, extremely disrespectful for those who have the condition for real. But in some cases, somebody actually does come to us and they do have it. They legitimately have it. And now we are trying to teach them something that, and I've had this happen as a teacher. I'm trying to teach somebody something, and yet I'm causing this person to have like psychological flashback. Right. Inadvertently, I am putting them into a state of panic and trauma, which is a horrible feeling as a teacher. Horrible feeling as a teacher, because this person should, of course, feel safe walking in my doors. It should not be a place where they are frightened. But
that's a deep topic.
Yeah,
Dan. Maybe we could. I would like to touch on it now. I would definitely think we could maybe talk to that on another show, and maybe even potentially interview, someone who maybe had an experience like that as a martial arts student, right?
What would be really cool would be, can we talk to a psychologist about it?
Yeah. Take notes, producer Tam.
He's already on it.
So no, but I think, first off, I guess I would say, when people come in the door, I usually you try and ask them, like, well, what brought you in, right? Or what are you interested in? Or, you're going back and forth. You're talking, have you ever been in a fight? Have you ever been in a self-defense situation? It's an easy question to ask, and you can kind of judge people's responses, right? But sometimes people, and you can be prepared for it, right? If someone comes in and says, oh yeah, my husband used to beat me or whatever, right? Mm-hmm. And that's obvious, right? Or, I was just bullied by the schoolyard or at the schoolyard, or, whatever people will tell you, I was robbed or mugged once. Those things are obvious, but there are occasionally times too where they don't really know, right? I mean, like, something that happens in the classroom can bring up some memories or feelings they hadn't thought about in years or didn't think was a big
Yeah.
deal, right? So
Right.
it can catch you by surprise. I think you need to be aware, and I think you need to have hopefully built, enough trust over time that, it's a situation you can recover from.
That's actually kind of the key thing there is trust. Because maybe they are completely aware and they just aren't ready to tell you. You know.
Yeah, and I think, if you're doing good training, you're going to put yourself in the position to bring up memories like that, right? I mean, like
Right.
um, we did, um, we did something in class one time. It was last year sometime. We were talking about active shooter scenarios, right? And so we actually set something up, put some, mats standing up on edge to use as like doorways and, wall off the room and stuff like that. And just went through some, strategies you could use to try and survive a situation like that, right? And like one of my students at that point in time was getting like, um, you know, jittery, right? Like you could just see that they were doing a really good job of mentally putting themselves in that situation, right? Like
Too
how
good.
how bad would this suck? How terrifying would this be? And I could see that occurring, and we were able to talk about it. I mean, I think just being able to talk about it openly, not waiting for them to bring it up, but bringing it up yourself, like, man, this sucks. This is terrifying, right? How are we going to do it? But at least we're here. At least we're feeling it here when it's controlled, and we're not really in any danger. And now we know what we're going to feel like when it happens for real. You can just kind of work through that. I think the wrong thing to do is to not put any controversial training in your system.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Right.
Same thing we
Well,
were talking about before with the ground survival. It's like, yeah, it sucks. We don't like it,
still got to do it.
but we still got to do it.
Well, from that same context, just like everybody else, when you're an instructor, you're learning, right? I mean, I teach very differently than how I taught 20 years ago. I teach very differently than how I taught 20 years ago. That's for sure. There's things that have completely removed from my repertoire as an instructor because I have learned better. I've learned better ways to do things. I've learned more efficient ways to do things. I've learned more appropriate ways to do things. I've done some things in the past that honestly, 43-year-old me can look at 23-year-old me and go, "Ooh, wow, dude, you really did. You said that. You seriously said that. Wow."
Yeah,
Um,
well, go ahead.
but I think one of the most important ones. I mean, what you just said a minute ago, I completely endorse. Which is, it may be controversial, but or it may be difficult, but you gotta train it. And in women's self-defense courses, one of the first things that I figured out for myself after I've taught like two of them and saw the trauma in women's eyes, because if you know the statistics on domestic abuse and rape and things like that, if you're teaching a self-defense course to only women and you have a dozen women in that room, you can be sure somebody in that room has had domestic abuse or rape or both. You can be positive of it. Okay. The statistics are way too likely for it not to be the case.
Yep.
Chances are you've got three of them. Um, and one of the things, and of course, I'm a guy. Those are not things that naturally occurred to me because I haven't been in those situations, nor has it ever really been a danger for me. So, until I started teaching women in those contexts, unfortunately, it didn't really occur to me. After like the second seminar like that, I started prefacing my my seminars that are women only by explaining to them, listen, you don't have to do anything we do today. Anything we do, you can bow out of. You do not need to explain yourself to anybody. You don't owe anybody an explanation or an apology. And at any point in time, if you are feeling uncomfortable, you feel free to excuse yourself to get a drink, go to the restroom. You don't have to tell anybody anything about what's going on with you. Just to try to be upfront with the ladies of I understand this is all difficult and that this can
Yeah.
have a negative impact, and if you need to excuse yourself, you don't have to feel like you're going to cause a scene. You can do so however you need to.
And I think that's a great example just of this whole topic that we've been going over today, where, someone with a 20-year-old training attitude would tell you you're soft for doing that.
Yeah.
Right.
There's no crying in baseball.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Like, what, this is war, you got to suck it up. You got to, you're going to cry, you're going to fight, that's whatever it is. But again, it comes back to, that person would leave and never come back.
Yeah.
So maybe they miss a half an hour of training and then they come back and learn something else. Right. Or maybe the next time they come back, they're at least willing to stay in the room and see what happens. Right.
Yeah.
That's that intensity over time argument we talked about before.
Yeah.
We have the luxury in our current society of making that choice, of being able to make that trade-off. And by doing so, we can bring the training to more people.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm the thing I'm noticing with our conversations over the last several weeks is when we bring a topic, we very often can't come to an actual definitive resolution. And well, I think that's what you get with people. I think that is just what happens when you start talking about people in general. Is you're never going to find we might as well say what's better, chocolate or vanilla or strawberry. Pick one, and you're never going to get an answer that 100% of people are going to agree with.
Right,
You're never going to get an answer that 60% of people are going to agree with. There'll be 40, 40, and 20. So it's just one of those things that you got to learn to accept that there's always going to be variation. And I think we are in a unique position nowadays where we can go ahead and we can, by being a little bit gentler and a little bit kinder, like we just discussed, we have a better opportunity to make somebody stronger. So
yeah. But I think it bears stating and restating, because we did say it earlier in the show as well. That all assumes that we're teaching a complete system, and we're not shying away from the hard stuff.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So it doesn't mean I have to come in and beat my students to a pulp to make them tougher. Right.
Yeah.
It just means that I have to give them all the tools they need. Right. When I start making decisions not to train on important stuff because it's hard or undesirable, that's when I'm going soft. Right?
If you start to avoid knife defense, because that's a little makes me squeamish.
I got a good example of that one for you. When I was training in Aikido Jiu-Jitsu, we were doing knife defense techniques. I remember the technique, this one specific, we had done several of them, building off of each other. We did one where we were like pushed face up against the wall and someone was holding a knife to our lower back. Right. And we were doing a technique for that. And we did it felt like forever. Like we were really drilling this technique in that class. And after we'd gone on for a while, the instructor's like, all right, here's a real knife. Now do it with this. Right. And just like the air went out of the room. I mean, like all of us were just like sucked right in.
Serious?
And like, you gotta be freaking kidding me, dude. Right. I mean, like we would never say that to the guy, but everybody was thinking it. Right. And sure enough, we did it, but it changed. Like it was very obviously more than 20 years later, I remember that particular technique. Right. And that was because it made you feel all the things, right? It made you feel the cold, like, your body like went into that fight or flight response. Your arms got cold because it pulled all your blood in, right? hyper aware, you were jittery. I mean, it was all there. It was extremely good training. And, he did it in a controlled fashion, and I won't let all of his secrets out on how exactly he did that, but certainly better training for having done that than, someone who might say, I would never expose my students to that. And let me tell you, YouTube listeners or everyone who's listening, don't just put a sharp knife in your students' hands and tell them to go practice. There was more to it than that, but it was very good training.
See, my Kung Fu teacher had something similar, but his methodology was if he would watch everybody practicing knife defense, and when he noticed everybody was getting complacent and they weren't really putting the right intention, he'd pull out like a Bowie knife, like something seriously frightening to look at. And he'd go, okay, and he'd start talking to you with that knife in hand. And as people got the heebie-jeebies like you're talking about, and he'd be like, okay, here's what we're going to do. And then people would start to set themselves like, oh shit, this is real. This is real. And he'd go, okay, cool, good. You got the message. You put the knife away and go, that's the way you should be prepared for that knife, even though that knife's not real. So now just imagine that. He wouldn't actually, face off with you with it, but he would put you in a position where he sure as hell made you think that you were about to have that knife come at you, and you'd definitely drop your stance and get ready to go. And he's like, okay, good. Now you get the message.
Yeah. We can, maybe we do a show on favorite martial arts training moments. I've got a couple more along those same lines.
Yeah.
Just very impactful that same way. So, yeah, I mean, I think, I'm not one of those people that the older I get, the less black and white I am about things, but I would say, to kind of wrap this thought up here, martial arts has gotten different. And you will be able to find examples of how it has gotten soft, but that is not because it's different. It's because of individual decisions that programs or instructors or even students make, right?
I agree. Very much so. Yeah, I agree totally. So what's our topic for next week?
So next week, we're going to talk about ground survival.
And I think everybody's already gotten at least a little bit of a flavor of what the attitude of what that's going to be like.
Yeah. Yes, I think there's a lot to cover there. It is extremely popular in the martial arts right now, and
it's also vital.
It is vital. It is a vital skill. I agree with that too. So, got some ground we can cover there. Pun fully intended. Yeah. So, everybody, before we go further down the pun rabbit hole, we'll call it a night. Thanks for watching. Please, like, subscribe, share. Obviously, we're a very new channel. Every little bit that you can do to help us get our name out there, we really appreciate. Hit us up with some comments. We have ideas for shows, but we're always looking for new ones, always looking for exciting things, and we want to cover what you want to hear. So please let us know.
Thanks.
Thanks, and good night, everyone.